How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Buddy's House of Horror Podcast, and welcome to my review of Late Night with the Devil, one of my most anticipated films of the year, and subsequently one of my favorite films of the year. And we're going to get to all of that just here in a second, but before we do that, if you guys haven't already, you got to make sure you're subscribing to my show wherever you listen to the show, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get the show, make sure you're subscribing, hitting that review button, leaving me a 5-star rating and a review, and pointing this show in the direction of anyone who would enjoy Buddy's House of Horror, the premier horror podcast on the internet. And with that, we're going to get right to my review of Late Night with the Devil, coming at you right now. So now let's get spooky. How is it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Buddy's House of Horror Podcast. And boys and ghouls, are you on the square? Are you on the level? Are you ready to listen right here, right now, to my review of Late Night with the Devil? One of my favorite films to have come out in the past year. A film that I've talked about a little bit on a couple other shows, but right now it is getting its own fully dedicated episode to really sit down, talk about it, dissect it a little bit, and we will be getting into some spoiler territory towards the end of the episode. So if you have not seen Late Night with the Devil, definitely make sure you check it out before you go too far into this episode. We're going to keep it spoiler free for the most part, but then we are going to get a little bit into the nitty gritty details. It's all about the details with this film. I hope all of you guys are having a great October day, like always. Like every time we do one of these episodes, I hope you guys are taking in all the autumnal delights that are surrounding you. And I did just the other night, because I rewatched Late Night with the Devil, which is something I wanted to rewatch now that it is on streaming services, now that you can get it on Blu-ray, now that you can get it on VHS even. I've been wanting to talk about it for a while since it came out, and I saved it for an episode of the House of Horror because I wanted to sort of compare and contrast a little bit the experience watching it at the theater and the experience of watching it at home. And like I said, I want to break down the film a little bit, and we're going to get right to that, and we're going to cut all the bullshit. We're going to get right to the nitty-gritty of this film review. We're not going to talk about the DoorDash that I had, like we talked about in the previous episode. We're going to talk about this, that, and the other thing. We're going to talk about the film at hand, Late Night with the Devil. Of course, coming out this past year in 2024, if you look on Letterboxd, it will say 2023. Of course, it hit a few festival circuits prior to release, but came out officially in theaters in the year of 2024. Do not adjust your set. A live broadcast of a late-night talk show in 1977 goes horribly wrong, unleashing evil into the nation's living rooms. What is the premise of Late Night with the Devil that you cannot get from the Letterboxd description? Late Night with the Devil is essentially about a television host who goes by the name of Jack Delroy, played by David Desmelchin. And basically he is on the verge of getting his show canceled. We learn, and this entire story is framed through a documentary type. So all of this stuff already went down. All of this stuff is real. It is legit. This film is very unique because it's like a combination of a found footage-esque style, a documentary style, a narrative film. It blends so many different genres of film together, and it blends together a lot of different genres of film that I love together. It blends together found footage, which we're watching the footage of the actual newscast that aired on television. We are dealing with some sort of framed-ish story, which I love. I love stuff that shows a little bit of realism, like it's portraying it as if this actually happened. Um, in one of my favorite subgenres of film are movies about making movies or movies about making television, movies that show the behind the scenes of productions, movies that deal with creating something. It's what I love to do. So films like obviously American Movie, films like The Disaster Artist, films like I don't know. There's all kinds of films out there. There's lots that are escaping my mind right now. Um, but movies that portray the art of filmmaking are such a deep like subgenre of film that I love. So like I knew going into this film that I was going to at least love that aspect of this film. And let's talk about that just for a little bit. Let's talk about my first viewing experience of Late Night with the Devil. As I said, I saw this opening night. I saw this right about when the internet was rumbling about the controversy. And look, I don't want to go on an entire tangent or a whole larger discussion about the use of AI. I want to give this film a review of what it is, but basically just to say it, get it out of the way. The AI in this is just lazy. I'm not a graphic designer or anything, but I'm sure that even I could have whipped up the AI generated commercial breaks that they use within this film. The AI in this film isn't used for special effects, it isn't used to doctor footage, it isn't used to create fake voices, anything like that. It's simply used as lazy ways to do transitions from the commercial breaks into the rest of the films. So I think it was just a cheap way to cut corners. I do not like it. I do not agree with it. I do not condone it. I do agree that AI in general is a slippery slope that we sort of want to not have in our films. But in the case of this film, if you're looking at it at this film, I don't think that this film is that big of a deal with the case of AI. Just in my personal opinion. I mean, obviously, people were boycotting the film. People didn't want to go see it. Like, I was sitting in the parking lot of the movie theater when I heard about the use of AI in this film, and for a second I was like, I'm a filmmaker, do I really want to go and support this film that is using AI, which is something that myself, my friends, the film community is so heavily against. But I already had my ticket, and also I have a movie pass, so I didn't pay for the ticket anyway, so it's not like I really gave this film specifically my money, so it is what it is. I decided to go see it anyway, and I'm glad I did because it ended up being one of my favorite films of this year. And my theater-going experience to see this film was phenomenal, by the way. I love going to the cinemas. I love getting my sweet treats, sitting down, really immersing myself into that film. And something that I did more so with my second viewing, but the first viewing of this, I wanted to sort of replicate that at-home experience. Like, the theater near me, they actually have, like, a lot of nice food and stuff like that. So I got myself a personal pan pizza, a pepperoni, obviously. It actually wasn't a personal pan. The pizzas they do there are actually slightly larger than a small pizza. I want to say it's, like, in between a medium and a small. It's like a schmedium pizza. It's definitely not as big as a medium. Got myself a pizza, got myself some popcorn, got myself a large DC. That's Diet Coke for those of you that are uninitiated. And I was living it up. I was living my best life going to watch this film. I had a great time watching this film in theater. Obviously, as I said, this film checks a lot of my boxes. Obviously, we talk a lot on this show my love for the 70s. And this film takes place in the 70s on a late night television show. And in general, like, it's not something I watch all the time or something I'm super invested in, but I do like the concept and the execution of late night talk shows, like, as a concept. I don't normally watch a ton of them. If I am watching them, I'm watching, like, little clips on YouTube or something like that. Like, if it's an interview of someone I like or a performance of something I like. But I do have a lot of experience watching late night talk shows. When I worked at a news station, I used to run the commercials for the affiliate stations that I was in charge of for the Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers late night block, and also the Carson Daly show that they did a little bit after that. But that one wasn't really a talk show; it was more like a music show. But I watched a ton of late night television during that time. So for the entire year that I worked there, I watched every episode of Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers. So I've watched a lot of late night TV. So when you're exposed to it that much, you genuinely start to like it, I guess. Like I even watched a lot of the shows on NBC. It was an NBC station that normally I wouldn't be watching, but just because you're stuck there watching them anyway, you kind of find yourself getting invested in what's going on. Like I said, I love the concept of films about filmmaking. In this case, it's in the case of a television show. So I love how they are able to portray the story and do it through a different lens, different aspect ratios, different color temperatures. Sometimes it's the 70s color temperature, like this Technicolor late night television. When it goes to the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, it's in black and white, and it goes to a more full screen. Towards the end of the film, once shit starts hitting the fan, it actually goes to a more traditional filmmaking aspect ratio that we would see, like the 23, you know what I mean, the widescreen film aspect ratio. And it shows like a more modern color palette on it. The 235:1 beautiful widescreen that we see in pretty much everything. And it looks like a modern day film. So you're really getting like really 4 different film styles, because then there's the documentary at the beginning portion of it too. So it combines a lot of different film styles. It combines a lot of different aesthetics. And I like all of those aesthetics. Some things I noticed on my first time watch. Again, we'll keep this first time watch part a little bit spoiler free, and then we'll get into the spoilers when I talk about my second viewing. So I noticed upon a first viewing of this that there was a comedic amount of logos as you get into the beginning of this film. There are so many logos at the beginning of this film. I found myself laughing in the theater. So much so that when I did my second viewing, I actually counted them and timed it out to see just how long it was until you get to the actual film itself. Then once we open our film, as I said, it opens with this documentary talking about how the show Night Owls came to be. Jack Delroy, his past, his wife who had passed away from lung cancer despite never smoking a cigarette a day in his life. It mentions that he may have had some sort of affiliation with this cult that takes place in the Redwood Forest. A lot of filmmakers do it, and a lot of times the filmmakers that go there, they see a lot of success. So we already know that there's something supernatural going on here, allegedly. And then it says how he would always come up short to Johnny Carson. He'd never beat him in the ratings. And this show was his last-stitch effort to beat Carson, to get renewed, and to not have his show get canceled. This Halloween special that he was putting on was his last-stitch effort, and now we're going to be watching the episode in full as it aired on that night in the 70s, along with some never-before-seen behind-the-scenes footage. So, obviously, we open up with the intro to the Late Night Talk Show, which is a beautifully replicated 70s intro to a talk show that you would have seen. I love the intro to Night Owls, which is the show. I love that it takes place on a Halloween episode. So, like, I love that you go in there, you see the characters on the show. Of course, he is the host of the show, Jack Delroy, but he also has, like, his little assistant, Gus. He's dressed as a vampire. They have a band who are wearing costumes. The audience is all in costumes. And he does his monologue like you would see on a late night talk show. Obviously, 70s level humor involved in that. So this film is a horror comedy. It does have some jokes in it. It does feel like you're watching a late night talk show for a large portion of this, which I love. And he brings on guests to the show. So he has Chris Stew, who is a spiritual medium who's going to come and talk to the live audience, conjure up some dead spirits. He has a big skeptic named Carmichael Haig, who was a big magician back in the day. I guess he still is. and he's coming onto the show to kind of play the devil's advocate. And I fucking despise his character. A very well written character, very well acted character, very well portrayed, but they make this character so unlikable that I love it. Like, this performance, this character, it does exactly what it needs to do for the film. You cannot stand this fucking guy, and it is absolutely perfect. And then, of course, the main event, we're bringing on the little girl, Lily, who is being possessed by some sort of entity, and her caretaker. They are a part of the show as well. There's supposed to be a musical guest on the show, but mild spoiler alert, we do not get to the musical guest in this. The musical guest never makes an appearance. And you basically just play out the late night talk show. You see what twists and turns it's going to take. What is going on with the medium? What's going on with the little girl? What does the skeptic have to say about this? And how is he trying to prove everyone wrong? And also what's going on behind the scenes. Obviously, as the show is going further and further off the rails, he has people in his ear telling him he needs to pull the plug. But yet he has his producer saying that this is great television. We have to keep going. And we see a little bit of a darker side of Jack. He's obviously somewhat different from his onstage persona. So we get to see a little bit more of the behind the scenes with that. And again, for spoiler free, I'm not going to get into any of the details of what actually happens, what's going on, but I really, like, even after the second viewing, and we'll get into the second viewing stuff in a little bit, even after my second viewing, I really love this film. It brings to mind a lot of films similar to it in this genre. Like, you can't watch this film and not think about films like Ghost Watch, or think about films like the WNUF Halloween special. Stuff that is portraying itself, or maybe even was, in the case of Ghost Watch, something that was broadcast live to the public, and something supernatural is going on. One comparison I will make is with a film that came out in the same year, and I alluded to it. I did a little subtle foreshadowing, but it's very similar to Ghost's concert movie Right Here, Right Now, where you're seeing the performance, you're seeing everything that's going on, and then also you're seeing the behind the scenes. So when the singer of Ghost goes backstage, it shows what is going on behind the scenes in order to make this concert happen, which is similar to what goes on in Late Night with the Devil, where you're watching the show, it goes to a commercial break, and then we're backstage trying to figure out what's going on. So I really love this film. Like, there's not a whole much for me to say about it, other than I really love it. I really love the characters. I love the aesthetic. I love how it is directed. I love how it's paced. The only critique I have with the pacing, and it makes sense within the context of this film, but it does usually tend to turn its wheels a little bit. It feels like it's trying to fill a little bit of time, but I feel like that is very in tune with how a talk show would be. I feel like it's very in tune to what the characters would actually be saying and doing. Like, a lot of the conversations on the show are a little bit repetitive. There's a lot of times where they're repeating themselves because we're coming back from a commercial break. So that's the only, like, gripe that I have with the film's pacing. Like, it could have been trimmed down a little bit more streamlined, because obviously we're not actually watching the show, we're watching a movie. So there could have been a few subtle ways around that, but I understand why they did it. I understand how it makes sense within the context. But especially on this second watch, I did find it turning its wheels just a little bit, but that doesn't really affect my rating, my overall perception of the film, anything like that. So we're going to move on to my second viewing of the film and the spoiler round. So if you haven't seen the film, turn it off and come on back after you've seen the film. My second watch, what I wanted to do and why I wanted to rewatch the film, is because the film is called Late Night with the Devil. When I watched the film originally in theaters, it was still light outside. And when I left the theater, it was just, the sun was just coming down. I wanted to watch this film as if I was watching the late night talk show that it was actually on. I wanted to watch the film in the late of night. I wanted to watch it in my home, on a television, under a blanket, as if I was watching it on television. And that, I think, is the best way to watch this film. When I think of this film, it leads into a genre film that I want to start curating. One of the lists I want to do on my channel, maybe not this year, but sometime, I want to compile a list of the coziest horror films to watch. Not films like, I'm not going to put like the Peanuts in there, stuff like that, like stuff that's not meant to be scary. I want to put like actual horror films that sort of have like a cozy vibe. And this film definitely has a cozy vibe to it. Because if you're putting yourself into that mind space, in that headspace, that you're in your home watching a late night talk show, it is very cozy. It's a very, very cozy film, which I love quite a bit. Again, I wanted to make everything feel right. When I was at home, what I wanted to do was to count these logos and see how long it takes to get to the actual film. And I mean, granted, to all these studios, it took a lot of studios to get this film made for some reason. We're talking 9 logos and 1 minute and 43 seconds until we get into our actual film. That is absurd. Like, that is the longest amount of time that I've ever seen for it to take to get into the actual start of a film. That is the most amount of logos I've ever seen in a film. So let's talk a little bit about spoilers. So once you figure out what's going on, so like the girl is possessed by a demon known as Abraxas, or from what her caretaker theorizes, perhaps a lesser deity presenting itself as Abraxas. So as such, she does some supernatural shit. And when the stuff finally starts hitting the fan at the end, it turns into something that I find is very common with a lot of Shudder films, where the last few minutes just turn into a gobbled up CGI mess. And watching it again, because when I watched this for the first time in theaters, I was dumbfounded about how bad it looked. I was absolutely astonished about how bad the CG looked. Upon my second viewing, I knew what I was getting into. I was a little bit more forgiving, but the CG still just doesn't look great. Again, with a lot of the things they were doing, you had to use CG to do those. Like, there was no way practically for... Well, I guess you could, but there was no realistic way based upon probably what their budget was for this to do some of these effects that they were doing towards the climax of this film. So I don't like that part. Again, it kind of works. See, what I would have done is if I knew the CGI wasn't going to look phenomenal, I would have made the power in the studio. Because the whole thing with this is she's manipulating a lot of the electricity. Like, make it darker in the studio to sort of cover up that the CG doesn't look all that great. That's kind of how I would do it. As far as some other stuff, like, as I said, like, the wheels turn a little bit. Once you finally get to the part at the end, like the end, it starts to get real sort of out there and ridiculous, which within the context of the film I think really, really works. But I can see a lot of people being sort of turned off by the ending, maybe wanting it to have a little bit more of a mystery, something like that. But like, it really throws everything at the fan, which I love. But I don't really know a ton to say about this film. Like, I love the performances within this film. I love the way it was shot. Obviously, we talked about that. I love the direction. The cast all does great. Everyone in the cast does great. If you guys have seen the film, I want to know what you think about it, because I have gotten a lot of mixed reviews of this film. I really loved it, but I think I'm one of the only people who saw it this year that really hold it as high of a regard as I do. This is my second favorite film of the year, I believe. And my favorite film of the year, Terrifier 3, is another film that people aren't really super, super high on, like, as their favorite or second favorite film of the year. So I don't know if I'm just crazy or what's going on, but I want to know your thoughts. Have you seen Late Night with the Devil? What are your thoughts about it? Do you want to see more films like this? Because I want to see more films like this. I would love to make films like this. So it gets me excited. Films like this are what I love about filmmaking. Films like this make me so happy, and I just love it. Like, there's not a whole much else to say other than I love it, but I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear your thoughts, so let me know what you think about Late Night with the Devil. I wonder if they're still selling it on that VHS. If you can get it on VHS, that would be rad. I might look into that after I finish recording this. But that's pretty much all I have to say about Late Night with the Devil. Again, go check it out. Support it now that it's on streaming. Don't let the AI trip you up about it. Obviously, AI is bad. Obviously, AI is bad. I shouldn't have to tell you that. But it's not something that I think can really tarnish this film as a whole. And that's all I have to say about Late Night with the Devil at this time, right here, right now. But if I ever have more things to say about it, I will. In various other shows. So, with that, I will see you guys in the outro. Well, that's about it for this time, you guys. I hope you enjoyed my review of Late Night with the Devil. What did you think of the film? Let me know down in the comment section below. Reach out to me over on my social media platforms. And if you haven't already, you got to make sure you're subscribing to my show over on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to the show. Make sure you are subscribing, leaving a 5-star rating and a review, pointing this show, the premier podcast of all things horror on the internet. Point this show in the direction of anyone who would enjoy the show. I greatly appreciate it, and we will see you guys back here tomorrow for another episode of Buddy's House of Horror podcast. So take care and stay spooky.